The Last of Us series is finally here. The PlayStation Classic hit our screens just a few weeks ago, and its first episode was downright phenomenal. From the characters, the story, and so of course, the cinematography. I mean, just look at that car scene. It's basically a shot-for-shot remake of the original game. That just shows you the pure dedication, time, and the talent that these writers have put into the series. Episode 1 went off with a bang. The first episode was so special, as it showed the world that this was a series truly based around a game, gathering everything from the original game and turning it into live action, which is something surprisingly hard to do. We all know that video games have a really bad track record when it comes to live action adaptations. Animated ones seem to have a better deal, but they don't always stand out as much. I mean, Castlevania on Netflix sort of counts, but does it though? It's not a direct adaptation. In fact, it kind of takes a lot of aspects from all the games and combines them into one series. The Last of Us, on the other hand, is a pure and dedicated adaptation into live action, from the storyline to all the characters. It's like the game has just become a live action, and that's all that changed.
I know it doesn't look like it, but this here is not a bad read. Only one problem. Right there. To be continued.
However, despite the first episode not exactly changing too much, and in fact only really adding to the story, the second episode actually had a few huge changes. Thank God they didn't destroy the series with them. But let's discuss a few of these changes, shall we? And how episode 2 of The Last of Us differs from its PlayStation game counterpart. The series so far has definitely elaborated on multiple moments from the series, and thank God we're super happy the series hasn't deviated completely. Otherwise, it would be a complete mess on my right. But if you paid attention to episode 2, it has a few changes, even if they are still relatively restrained, and how much it differs from the original game.
For all those goddamn years I took care of us.
Took care? That's what you call it? I got nothing but nightmares from those years.
You survived because of me.
It wasn't worth it?
These few deviations are super important going forward, and are well worth paying attention to. So let's get into it already. Obviously, we're going to get deep into the spoilers for The Last of Us Episode 2, and maybe even small parts of the game later on. So make sure you're all caught up with this phenomenal series, and let's get going. Just like the premiere of The Last of Us, Episode 2 surprisingly has a completely original sequence. During the opening moments of the second episode, we get even more insight into what went on before the apocalypse happened. This sees us in Jakarta back in 2003. Here we follow my college professor, Ibu Ratna, where she is brought into a government facility to examine a dead woman with a tendril in her mouth and a human bite on her foot. God, this scene was so eerie, wasn't it? I mean, we already know what's going to happen, but it's still super interesting to see what went on before the outbreak. The fact that the writers are writing even more content to what went on before. We wouldn't be surprised if each episode from now on starts off with a small sequence such as this. We'll get even more information as it goes on, and we could even see it tie into the ending of The Last of Us series.
Can I have a gun?
Absolutely not.
Okay, Jesus, fine. I'll just fucking...
Here are some big spoilers, so once again, make sure you have played the game before watching any further. Here we go. Are you all watching with caution? The end of The Last of Us game sees Joel finally take Ellie to the Fireflies and their doctors. But after some tests, it's revealed that Ellie must die in order for the cure to be created. And the cure itself might not actually work in the first place.
But whatever it is you think you're going through right now is nothing to what I have been through. I knew her since she was born. I promised her mother I would look after her.
At the end of the day, these doctors aren't exactly professionals. But we could see a small change here. If all of these awesome insights are happening at the start of each episode, they could eventually lead deeper into the outbreak, where we are currently with Joel and Ellie, finally tying into the final hospital scene of the series.
Sweet Jesus.
Doctor?
What are you doing in here? I won't let you take her. This is our future. Think of all the lives we'll save.
No!
This would be insanely cool, and could even set up further development in another season. Now, wouldn't that be sick? We already know the second season is coming and that it's going to adapt The Last of Us Part 2. But with all the controversy around that game, could we see a few things tweaked? Honestly, I think it would be great for the show. We absolutely can't wait to see the series go forward, as the plot thickens. The infection is a huge part of the game as well as the series. I mean, it's the entire reason everything went down, right? But did you know they actually changed it for the series? Huh? Yes! If you paid enough attention, then you'd realize that the show has actually changed the infected into something different. Rather than having spores through Ellie and Joel's journey like the games, it looks like the series has gone for a brain infection that ties all of the infected together. Yep, there are no spoilers in this version of The Last of Us, but actually makes a lot of sense. The reason for this is that if all of this was in reality, the spores would not sit in one place. The game has the spores sitting in certain areas where you have to put a gas mask on. But if this was real life, obviously, the spores would move around and infect the rest of the world. In order to change this, but keep the threat of the infected, Neil Druckmann and the other writers turned the fungus into an underground ley line. This is super sick, and we can't wait to see how deep it goes into the series. Joel explains in episode 2 that standing on one batch of cordyceps will actually alert another batch of infected across a city. Yeah, it's really that deep. We saw at the end of the episode, in fact, Joel shot one of the infected.
Please.
And hundreds of them came running. It was super intense. I mean, that scene was awful to watch. But obviously, that's not the worst of it. There is even more heartbreak to come later in the season, and obviously in part 2. Finally, we have the biggest change in The Last of Us, episode 2. We all know Tess, right? She's one of the most important characters in the early stages of the game, and of course, the last 2 episodes of the series. In the game itself, things actually play out similarly to the series. Tess reveals that she was bitten in the museum and stays behind to protect Joel and Ellie. Despite them cutting out the scene of Joel killing various people, things play out basically the same, apart from Tess's specific death being much different in the show. God, just talking about it is disgusting. The already infected Tess is given a kiss of death by an infected. When the scene is aired, social media went absolutely crazy. I mean, this scene was disgusting and made no sense, right? Yes, it was, of course, disgusting. But it does make a lot of sense with the explanations we have now. The kiss of death was a sort of symbol for Tess's infection. She already knew she was gone, and that kiss was a sort of acceptance of her death. Or a last kiss that Joel never gave her. We can't really decide on that one. I mean, what would you think? So many people have already given their opinions. Let us know yours in the comments section.